Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Conference Board special webcast on why 78% of your organization couldn't care less about your transformation initiative and what to do about it. Our speakers today are going to address that and answer that question for you. I am really pleased to have join me today Nellie Wartoft, who is the founder and CEO of Tiger Hall, and Timissa Smittendorf, lead commercial capabilities at Kellanova. I'm Barbara Lombardo, program director and distinguished principal research fellow at the Conference Board, and I'm really pleased to serve as your moderator today. Before turning to Nellie, I want to just talk a little bit about the objectives of the next hour that we'll be spending together. First, you're going to learn about why, in a rather alarming, I think, 70% of transformations fail. They'll be addressing that. And why so many employees are just indifferent to transformation initiatives, don't care. We're going to learn how to communicate authentically to build trust. You're going to learn what kinds of strategic messaging resonates with employees' sense of identity, which you'll hear is very critical to the solution to this problem. Timissa and Nellie are also going to address increasing engagement and participation with effective change activation methods. And then finally, they'll address why multilingual and multimodal communications are so critical in a global context. And one of the things that is really special about today's webcast is Timissa is going to be sharing a kind of a case study of the work that Nellie and her team did with them when they, the strategy for when Kellogg split into Kellanova and WK Kellogg. So with that, I'll turn to Nellie.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And so great to be here and see all of you in this virtual room. I want to start with throwing the question back to the audience and all of you here. And if you can use the attendee chat to just let me know, how would you feel if your transformation initiative failed? Completely failed, how would that make you feel? And you can put anything in the chat, good, bad, ugly, disappointed, and just let me know a bit how this will make you feel. I was asking an audience of change leaders this same question in London about a month ago, and most of them answered disappointed. We have demoralized, deflated, terrible, frustrated, a lot of frustration, upset, horrible, mortified, defeated. And I hear you. What held us back? Yeah, disengaged. That's a good one, Sarah. Disengaged. Uninspired. Another great one. Devalue, disappointed. Yes, it's not positive, right? Like, you would not feel great if this happened. I think that's the summary of these answers. You would not feel great. Now, we have the data of 256,000 employees from all of these companies that you see on the screen that we're working with, and many other similar enterprises. And we've asked them the same question. Every time we come in and start a transformation, a change, we ask them the same question. So my next question to you is, what do you think their response was? 256,000 people across large American multinationals. How do you think they responded to the same question? Do you think they would also be disengaged, disappointed, frustrated? Do you think they would ask, what did I fail to see or miss? 256,000 people. Angry, indifferent, the same. I think they would feel similarly. Losing their job. How does this affect me? So when we asked these 256,000 people, how would you feel if transformation initiative X failed, this is what their response was. Out of 5 options, from pleased to devastated, this is the percentage response that they're giving to the exact same question. I would guess many of you in the audience are change and transformation leaders. Most of the people who responded to this are not. And this is their response to exactly the same question. 78% are in the buckets of neutral, doesn't concern me, or even pleased. Still a large number of Karens out there in the world. And I was a regional manager at a FTSE 250 firm. I started in London, where the headquarters were, and then I got transferred to Singapore. And I had about 20 peers with similar sized teams. I had a size team of about 50 people. And I would say all of them were in the 78% as well. And this is what got me really interested in this problem. And we had this issue of how do we get people involved in these large changes, in these large transformations that we're driving? And how do we get people to care about this? So I came up with a lot of ideas, started thinking about how can we solve for this and how can we find a solution. I brought this idea to my APAC CEO and pitched this as actually this could be a good business idea because it's not only us struggling with this, it's so many companies around the world who are struggling with this. And his response to me was, that's a very cute idea. And let me put this in context of me being the #1 revenue generator out of 8,000 people in all of Asia Pacific. And he told me that's a very cute idea. So the next week, he had my resignation letter on his table. And I resigned and started Tiger Hall instead, with a view to change the statistic. And today we work with companies that you saw on the previous slide and many more across 32 countries worldwide, and helping them to drive change activation. And me and my team have always been interested in this and just asking why. Why is this happening? Why are the stats like this when you launch a new initiative or drive any type of change? So what I'll be sharing with you today are our learnings, insights, and observations from millions of data points that we've collected over the last 5 years, working with these large enterprises and driving, enabling, and succeeding in change. And they're also my observations as the chair of the Executive Council for Leading Change, which is a community of over 250 senior transformation leaders around the world, and seeing what works and what doesn't. And in all of our data and observations, there are 4 areas that are very different between the companies who succeed in this and the companies who are not as successful in this. And those are the 4 areas that I'll be talking about today. And then after I share some of the data points, we're going to hear from Tomissa on how this was actually applied in practice, because that's ultimately what matters at the end of the day, is how do we apply this in the real world, right? So these are the 4 things that separate the best from the rest. And it is the type of messaging that you lead with. It is very much your communication style. It is definitely your delivery method. And it's also about organizational connectivity. If you nail these 4, your 78% will be much, much lower than 78%. If you fail in these 4, your 78% is likely closer to 90 or 95%. But it really, really comes down to nailing these 4 areas. So if we start with the type of messaging and looking at what type of messaging should you lead with to really engage people, there is one core insight here that people always say that people are afraid of change and fearful and you might lose your job and just lots of fear around this topic in general. But actually people aren't afraid of change. People are quite happy to change and to see change happening. But what they're very afraid of is identity loss. There is nothing that kills human motivation and engagement as much as telling you that you are not who you think you are. If you pride yourself on being the fastest accountant to doing a manual Excel spreadsheet, if that's your identity, someone coming in and telling you we're going to automate this, basically telling you you're useless, you're not valuable, and who you think you are is not what we value. That is what is crushing people. It's not telling them that we're going to become an automated company. It's about telling them your identity is going to change. So how can you lead with a type of messaging that is much more around identity than what most organizations tend to do, which is focusing on process and workflows and do this, and we're going to change this, and this is how you're going to work from now onwards? That doesn't fly. So when we look at the data around this, when we see companies that use messaging that is centered around reshaping identity and comparing that with a messaging type that is centered around reshaping processes and workflows, these are the differences in change adoption and in sentiment. So this is an interesting comparison, right? Like, yes, change adoption curve goes up much faster when you focus on reshaping identity and who we are. But if you look at the sentiment, it's overall a much more positive journey for everyone involved as well. They feel better, they have more positive ideas around the change, more positive sentiment, and they're much more likely to be on board. So this is a huge difference in how you do it. And how do you do it? You shift the balance in this way. So what most companies tend to do, you have a typical process that is centered around reshaping processes and workflows. And you start with usually a little bit of the why in the beginning, like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to become an AI company, we're going to become a cloud company, whatever it is. And then who needs to do what? Very quickly you go into stakeholder mapping. This is what everyone needs to do in different areas. And then maybe you have a little bit of whiff messaging, and then you drive down the how. Go to the Jira board, do this, use ChatGPT, da 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 da. And everything in your communication is around driving the execution of this process. There is nothing that leads to more change circumvention than trying to tell someone to execute something that is not part of their identity. That's the worst thing you can do. And then at the end, there might be a little bit of the how. Usually reinforcement is lacking, no success stories are being shared, and that's your typical execution process workflow. Now, if you look at the opposite side, where it's more around the identity, there are three things that you need to do. And if you do these well, execution tends to come pretty naturally after them. So there's a lot of focus on the journey, what's the past, present, and future, and building the narrative. Humans love storytelling. We were born for stories, and from childhood all the way to adults, we love a good story. So tell a good story and leverage the past, present, future. Where are you today, and how does this change tie into the wider narrative and the wider storytelling? And then very key is the external orientation around the why and who we are. So don't do it in the espoused way of just like, we're now an AI company. No, focus on like, what's happening in the external world? What are the technological advancements that has led us to this point? What are the opportunities in our industry? How is this affecting our customers? Tell them about the context of the wider marketplace and define the change as a role in your customers' worlds as well. So not just telling them an empty statement of what you're going to do. And then the how. And the how is not leading with, this is your new workflow and your new process, but rather success stories of like this new identity and showing examples of this new identity and making them feel like they're a part of it. So it's a big shift in how you're thinking about communications. And this is the first and one of the biggest things that we see being a big differentiator between the ones who succeed and not. Now we look at communication style. All of you probably know trust in institutions, authority at an all-time low. Everything from government to media to leadership, trust is broken. So you need to start at a place where assume that no one trusts you and start with thinking about how do you build trust. And if you think of leadership, it's this graph here at the bottom right, you see global trust in CEOs has evaporated. Take India out and all the other countries, lower than 50% are trusting CEOs. So if you're sending out your CEO to deliver a we're an AI company message, people are not going to believe it and they're not going to trust. So you need to start from a place of zero basing trust and thinking, how can we build that? And the way that you build trust in 2024 and I think beyond is not by being scripted. It's not by being in front of a green screen. It's not by having this formal welcome to my town hall and I'm excited to tell you about this new change we're going to do. That's not how you build trust. The way you build trust is by being raw. It's by being you. It's by being authentic, unscripted, and daring to just speak to the camera and tell people what you think. And I know this freaks PR teams out. I know it freaks HR teams out. but it's the only way that people are going to believe what you're saying. If you're showing up there with a suit and tie and 12 PR people in the background and you're reading off a script, people are not going to believe you. And when we compare these differences and we ask people the question, do you trust your leaders' decision making? Do you think that your leaders are telling you the truth? Are you excited to be part of this organization? And then you compare the ones who've been through this raw, authentic, unscripted communication style with the welcome to my town hall, I'm here to tell you. And these are the results. So the ones who agree with these statements in the former way of communicating compared to the ones that are more scripted, it's a world of difference. And I know many leaders are very uncomfortable with this, and it takes work to get them to warm up to this idea because they might have spent 30 years of their corporate career being the scripted, stiff suit and tie people that they have been forced to be. And that doesn't work anymore. So that needs to change. And some tactical ways of very easily increasing trust, or very easily, but a way to increase trust. There are 5 things that work really well. And the first one is having the two-way feedback loops. And the more instant, the better. Because a two-way feedback loop is not setting up an email inbox and telling all the employees that, hey, send us an email if you have a question, and then we will respond to you in the next 30 days. That's not a two-way feedback loop. People want instant. They want to be heard. They want to be having their questions answered. They want to tell you what they think. And if you go at them with this one-way, top-down, one-directional message, it's not going to fly. Second, that works extremely well, is to communicate even when there are no news or updates to report. There's nothing that kills rumors more than just communicating even when there's nothing to communicate. If you do a weekly town hall or whatever you do, and then nothing has happened 1 week, so you're silent, rumors start immediately. Immediately we see rumors coming up. So always consistent on communication, even when nothing is happening, is really key. And then transparency around the pros and the cons. People are adults. They're going to see through if you tell them that the world is perfect and this is a win-win-win change and our employees are going to win, our customers are going to win, our shareholders are going to win. That's not always the case. So be transparent around the pros and cons and dare to say that some people might lose their jobs. And that's the reality. That's how the world works. And we are doing this to increase shareholder value, not to be better corporate citizens. That's fine. That's how businesses work. Okay. But just be honest and don't try to be something that you're not, and tell employees that you're doing something that you're actually not doing. It's just going to fire back. Sharing a personal change experience, nothing more powerful than sharing as a leader. This is what I'm going through. I'm going through the same change as you, and this is how it's affecting me and how I'm dealing with it. Very, very powerful. And then having personable, relatable environments. A fun fact, and we've A/B tested this, when you have a Zoom background on, or like a kind of like virtual background that is not your house, right, or not the environment you're in, can anyone guess how much trust decreases when you have a fake background? Any percentage? How much does it decrease when you have a virtual background? It's actually up to 40%. So up to 40% decrease in trust when you have a fake background compared to having a just normal, like where you are. Because unconsciously, people go, what are you hiding? What are you not showing me? Like, why do you have this blurred background on, or like this hidden like virtual background on? So just being in a relatable environment, being at home, showing that you're a human too, that's another great way to increase trust as well. So trust is a currency, and think about how you build it and how you manage it. Then we have the delivery methods. So of course you could do all of this perfectly, but if you put all of this type of communication, it's the right style, it's the trustworthy, and you put it up as 20 PDF documents on a SharePoint site that nobody ever visits, it's still going to be really hard to engage people, right? And this is where the bar has been raised a lot. And many of you might have teenage children, so I'm not going to talk to you about the impact of social media and how it has changed content consumption preferences and marketing and the rest of it. But I will say that it has raised the bar massively. And it has raised the bar massively when it comes to speed, user experience, engagement. And the thing is that people don't operate in isolation. they don't consciously lower their expectations when they come into work. If they have high expectations on the weekend, they're all across their Netflix, Spotify, TikTok, and the rest of it. It's not like, oh, Monday morning is here, so I'm now going to have lower expectations on user experience and speed and UI and all the rest of it. So that's not how it works. So when you think of how are you going to deliver this, think about providing it in a lot of different formats that cater to those modern consumption habits. And another interesting thing is language. So again, another question. If there's anyone in the chat who want to guess this, how much of global corporate communications do you think is in written format and in the English language of corporate communications? Any guesses of a percentage? Most? Yeah. Good guess, Kevin. 590. Ooh, very different. 10 points to Stacey. It is 85%, probably a little bit more. So most of global corp comms is written and in English, right? Now the next question. How much of global content consumption is in written format and in the English language? %. And this is all content consumptions, like at work, outside of work, all of it. Any guesses? 25, 40? Phil? 5?
Nelly, I'm going to throw out 10.
10? Another good guess. Okay, so lots between the 20, 30, 40. I think it was Phil that got it right. 4%. So this is something to think about, right? When we think of how do we capture people's attention, how do we communicate with them, especially if you're in a global organization with a global audience, multilingual, multi-generational, and you keep sending written English emails and PDF documents. This is how people are communicating today. And outside of work, when they're in their local language, most of this is a lot of video communication, and catering to those kind of consumption habits and how people prefer to consume information and knowledge is very, very different. So when it comes to how you deliver these messages, right, think through multimodal and providing different formats. And this includes audio, reading, listening, watching. Multilingual is so key. There is nothing, and I've spent 12 years in Asia, there is nothing that Asia hates more than getting everything American in English and just feeling like you're not respecting us at all. There is nothing that says more disrespect than not having language and translation. And then multi-access, being able to be where people are, whether that's on their phones or through Microsoft Teams or like wherever they choose to operate, being able to provide them access to the right information and the right knowledge where they are. So very key things to think about when you think of how are you going to deliver the information, the communications, and everything that you're using to engage them with. Last one, last big differentiator is the organizational connectivity. And hybrid work, here to stay, human connection mustn't go away. I didn't know how to present this without it sounding kumbaya and quite mushy. And it's hard to put a financial dollar ROI on the value of human connection. But I think we can all relate to this, and we have personal experiences around why this is so important. And if we look at the data around change, taking change as a journey together with a group compared to as an individual, you see this human connection, human experience coming up in the data points as well. So when you're pushing through change as an individual, you see change adoption curve sentiment about half of when you're doing change together as a group. And because a group is inspiring each other, they're uplifting each other, you can see where like people are ahead or behind, and you're like part of that group, and you can feel like you're connected to something bigger. It's usually very hard for most people to do this on their own, whereas when you put them as part of a group, much, much different impact. And these could be as simple things as, how are you facilitating cross-org interactions, ensuring that people feel connected to the wider organization, especially when you're going through change. Recognition, super, super key, like over-credit people all the time. Give them recognition for any small thing they've done that exemplifies this new identity that you're building as part of this change. Recognize them for that. Recognize them for making that change and for exemplifying it and for being that success story. And showing that people have shared experiences, that they're not the only ones going through this change. They're not the only ones that have to adapt and change how they're thinking about it and change their identity. And that goes both internally, but also externally. And just showing that this is a wider industry shift and this is affecting all of us can do wonders for just making people feel like this is a shared human experience. And socializing those success stories. So once you have success stories, socialize them, share them, get them out across all of the different groups across your organization. So simple things to do, but many times hard to prioritize and get right. But makes very, very big difference when it comes to change activation. So those are really the four where we see the good ones and the less good ones diverge, or the successes and the failures. And this is really what they're doing differently. So if you want this to look something a little bit more like that, these are the four areas that make that big difference. And just coming back to those. And I'll end this section with one of my favorite change quotes, which is, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And that insight, right, is really about the people. That's all you've really got inside an organization. So the rate of change on the inside is about the rate of change of the people. So if you want to increase the rate of change on the inside, it's all about how quickly can you get people to buy in, to support, and be part of driving that change. Because if people are not driving the change, then the change is not going to happen, right? And we all know that the rate of change on the outside is coming for us faster and faster and faster. So that rate of change on the inside, if that's not keeping up, then that end might very well be near. Thank you.
Nellie, do you have time for just a few questions before we turn to Mrs. Case Study?
Yeah, I think I do.
Good. A couple I just want to pose to you. One is, and you alluded to this a bit when you talked about CEO trust levels being so very poor. So you talked about, type of messaging, comm style, delivery method, or connectivity. Another piece is like the who is doing the communicating. So the question is kind of, is it always important to have like the most senior person possible be, the stakeholder, the sponsor, the communicator, or are there reasons why you wouldn't want to do that? And if you had someone other than, that most senior person, let's say CEO, does that almost raise questions about that person's sponsorship of the change? So it's really a big question about like who.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually some really good data around this as well, where they've asked people, if someone is delivering bad news or difficult news, who would you like to receive that from? And 70% of people say their direct manager. So if you can get the message delivered by someone's direct manager, that's by far the best you can do. And getting it out to the masses, right? The second option, which is funny, because if the number one preferred option is your direct manager, the second is actually the CEO. So the CEO or the most senior person, the president. And then after that, you have the business unit leaders, like your manager plus X levels. That's the third preferred option. Nowhere and no one wants the deliverer of the messenger to be the change management team or the HR team. Those are the bottom two. So do not lead with change messaging from like, hey, I'm Susan, you're head of change management, and this is what's going to happen, like the worst. So try and use your change champion networks, get the word out through them. And don't make it a centralized, boring corporate kind of messaging. That's the least effective, even though many still do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's helpful. And some people are even very allergic to the term change management. Being managed, which gets at your points about identity that you made earlier. One more question before we turn to Mrs. Case Study. Again, kind of a broad question, but you showed us some intriguing data about how the speed of change accelerates when it's a group going through the change together versus the individual. And it kind of creates, I think kind of virtuous cycle, reinforcing each other in making that progression. Can the reverse also happen, where if individuals are struggling with change, maybe because these things that you've just walked us through aren't happening, can that like drag others down, drag the group down, and kind of turn into a vicious cycle rather than a virtuous one?
It's a very good question. And we thought of that as well when we looked at the data. And like, is there any correlation between a negative sentiment? Because we measure a lot of sentiment, right? And looking, does that actually pull it down? But the answer is no. I think that's a little bit to do with, there is nothing that makes you better friends with anyone than when you have a common enemy.
Yeah, right. So, shared adversity.
Exactly. Shared adversity is at the top for like bonding with people. So what we've seen is that even when you connect people who might be like negative, and we also have a lot of data around like negative detractors, champions, like how people are feeling, right? So you can also do a lot of combination of these groups to get the right people together. But even if it's let's say majority negative people, when you share that experience, it still becomes a much more positive experience because they feel heard. And us as human beings, all we want to do is to feel heard and seen. Like, we're very basic creatures. So even if it's negative, as long as they feel seen and heard, their sentiment actually goes up because they feel like, I'm not alone in this. But then the best part is to have like 25-30% negative, and you put them together with like 70-75% positives. That's when you convert the negatives. But if it's the reverse, harder to convert, but still positive sentiment because of that connection.
Intriguing, and not what I was expecting. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions.
So is it time to turn to the case study now? And would you like to do a little introduction of Tamissa?
Let's do it. Let's do it. I'm very happy to be joined here.
Introduce her.
Yeah, so glad to be here with Tamissa. Tamissa and I met 3 years ago now, I think it was, and started working together when Kellogg was going through this big divestiture, when Kellogg announced we're going to split in 2 different companies and we're going to become Kellanova and WK Kellogg. And we worked with them all the way through that divestiture, the introduction of Kellanova, standing up Kellanova, and now with the recent news last week, the Mars acquisition, there is even more exciting change ahead of us. So Tamissa, welcome to the virtual stage.
Thanks for having me, Nellie.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So I want to start with, if you can take us back to the day this happened. This was June 2022, and the news had just broken that Kellogg is going to split up. It's a 100-year-old company. It's an American legacy. What happened during this day? Tell us about what was going through your mind and your team's minds this day in June.
Yeah. When you remember, there's pivotal times in your life when you remember every single detail about that day, but you can't remember what happened yesterday, but you remember those details of an impact or a big change. I was actually at a training in New York, and I was out for a run that morning. My boss calls me, and I thought something's going on because it was so early that morning. And he told me the news and said, get the team together and we're going to have some town halls, and we want to touch base with all of our team members to see how everyone's feeling. And for me, I love change, so it was really exciting news. But clearly, as the day progressed on and the more team members I talked to, the more anxiety and nervousness just really came across. And so I knew that we had to have a way to help folks through this change. And so the next day I was on a town hall presenting, and I remember that I said, look, there's a ton of change going on around us, but there is one thing that will not change, and that's our investment in you. And so then I needed to figure out, okay, for our commercial organization, how am I going to do that? Because I have a small team, and we can't train everyone and help upskill the organization, because you can imagine, all these people didn't know what company they would end up going with, if they would have a job, if they would be in the same job that they are today. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a way to make people feel really confident and really help them to feel confident that no matter what role, what job, what company they were going to be in, that they had the skills that they need for that position.
And I've always been amazed with the people focus that Kellogg, now Kellanova, has. And can you talk to us a little bit, like, why did Kellogg care about the activation side of it? Because usually you have strategy, planning, and then activation is kind of like an afterthought. But when it comes to capability building, communications, culture, why was this such a top of mind topic for Kellogg?
You know, I'm fortunate. We're in a company where we have amazing leaders. And I went to our leaders to say, look, we're going to have a problem. This is like a 12, 14 month transition, and you're going to have good talent that leaves the organization unless you continue to invest in them. So our mantra needs to be, we are committed to continue our investment in you, and be able to have a way to do that, a scalable, reasonable approach to be able to do this. And so that was the communication that we carried through the entire time, is we continue to invest in you.
That's incredible. And we're going to look at these 4 areas and how Kellogg, now Kellanova, executed on all of these 4, because I think you absolutely nailed it in all of these 4. And it's very rare that I say that about any company, but you were really, really spot on with how this was delivered and how you activated the organization. So starting with the type of messaging, what you mentioned around what isn't changing is our investment in you. That was very much part of that identity as a company and as a people-focused company. Talk to us a little bit about the different ways in which you built this identity and excitement around the change across the company.
Yeah. So clearly, Nellie, you were the first call. I had seen the Tiger Hall application, and I knew that there was a fit for it, because it was a way for us to upskill the organization in so many different ways. And the communication is just literally priceless, because, like you said earlier, we still did all of the town halls and things like that. That's more scripted communication. But this is a platform for you to be able to leverage to do live streams, ways to communicate, people need to feel that inclusiveness when you're going through a change like this. And so we were able to do that by building really inspirational podcasts and communications to be able to really engage our organization. And I think that was the differentiator.
Yeah, and the way that you tied it into the external narrative as well, with the Thinkfluencers, live streams, and making people feel like they were part of something bigger.
Yeah, and you know, your live streams, and you think about the Thinkfluencers that you have access to. I mean, that again was so priceless, because you could hear real world leaders that would come onto live streams with us and share how they went through change and how they took their company through change, and some of the things that they did, what worked, what didn't work. And it was really authentic way to be able to learn from organizations, quite frankly, all over the world, through these Thinkfluencers that you have access to on the platform. And it was moving. It was a moving experience to be able to listen and then know, like, we're going to get through this together.
My favorite is still the Pringles podcast, like having a podcast about Pringles as a brand and the story around it. And you also have this focus on like what isn't changing, to make people feel like this is still their identity. They're still part of the Pringles brand and all the other great brands.
Yeah. And actually that was a great segue into when we transitioned into our new company, Kellanova. We had so many new people. We leveraged all those podcasts that we did on the brands. So that was amazing. It continued to be able to, leverage the platform.
And share a little bit about communication style, because this is also one of the things that Kellanova did extremely well, is how you communicated and the realness, the authenticity. How did that work?
Yeah, I feel like this was a game changer because we have always done traditional town halls and things like that. And again, there's times and place for you to leverage town halls. But where we got everyone engaged is through live streams. We had never done a live stream before. So, it's fun, it's engaging, it's unscripted. So leaders across the organization we had on live streams, and like to your point, Nellie, they could be so authentic in their messaging. And it was just a really fun way because, as you see the live stream happening, you can comment, you can ask questions in the chat. And again, it's just a great way for you to really be engaged with the presenter and with the leaders. And like I said, be a little bit more authentic. Our organization is very mobile. So for us to be able to have our phones and be able to see the live streams as you're, sitting in an airport, things like that, it's just so functional to be able to leverage. But we absolutely love the live streams. And after we did the first one, people enjoyed it so much, they were asking for more. So we were in a good spot.
And I love all these like small videos you put out around like people like doing their coffees and they're like walking to the office. Like it was so personable and relatable. It was nothing like a scripted green screen environment.
Yeah, so that was a way that we actually brought people in and got them excited about it. It was like a little marketing campaign that my team did, How Do You Tiger Hall? And so this was, again, a way to bring them into the app and make sure that, we were highlighting some of those really powerful podcasts that they should go listen to. Because I knew once we implemented this, all I needed to do is have them listen to one podcast that they absolutely love. And there's so many of them on the platform. I knew that would draw them in and we would get that percentage rate up there. And let's face it, we rolled this out as a totally optional platform for people to leverage during this change. But you will see that the adoption rate was, I bet, the best in the industry. But it's things like this that how you go about it and what you can do to really make it impactful and authentic. It's a great communication for the organization to be able to leverage. Very different. Catches your attention too.
Yeah. And what made you decide that, this kind of delivery method would be suitable? Because you might you had SharePoint, you had email, you had Teams, why not just deliver all of this on any of those platforms, right?
Right. We've got a learning management system, the list goes on, right? But, I knew from being in the platform that I love the bite-sized. I love a shorter podcast. You've got these 18-minute podcasts, 15-minute podcasts that you can get in and listen to. It gets to the point, it leaves you with 3 things that you can automatically go implement immediately. So you can put that knowledge right to action. That's what I love. I really appreciate that. And the fact that this was a scalable approach for us. And I say that because people didn't know where they were going to land. So we wanted to make sure that we upskilled them through leadership, functional knowledge. We had to think about everything, and your platforms got it all. In fact, we gave all of our competencies to your team, and they created trails for us. So when we launched this, we launched it with first to our top leaders across our commercial organization, and we did a live stream and then launched a trail around driving transformation for senior leaders. Then we went to all people managers. Then we went to the organization. So we did it in this method to be able to bring everybody in. And like I said, once people experience it, they could just see the connectivity, because we learned through COVID that people still want to be connected. And, our commercial organization sets all across the country. And this was a way for us to be able to be connected, share experiences. You can follow people, you can like things. it was fun and engaging. And that's what we needed at the time. So you needed a little bit of everything. And that's why I love the platform, because you literally have it.
And on that point of connectivity, what exactly did you do to connect the organization?
So I'm telling you, the live streams were amazing, because I remember we had our chief customer officer on a live stream, and we did it all around well-being. And because if you think about it, people were very stressed during this time. And he talked about cold plunging and all these things that I can guarantee you on a town hall we wouldn't be talking about. And it just really, like I said, it allows you to be so transparent and authentic. And that really shines through when you can communicate in this way. I also had one of our vice presidents from our commercial organization reach out, and she said, you know, I want to do this Wake Up with Tiger Hall, and I want to do my own live stream in the fitness center, 15 minutes one day, where I can show people how to literally just deep breathe. You're sitting in all these meetings, it's can be stressful. She's like, if you just take a few minutes to take a few deep breaths, it can really calm your nerves. And so she did this all on her own. And then I started getting all these messages with, hey, let's do morning power walks and coffees and all these things. And I'm thinking, okay, all these leaders, they have full-time jobs. But it created, again, this community of togetherness when we needed it most. So it was awesome.
Yeah. That really made people bond. And yeah, it was amazing to see. And you call it the transformation trifecta. Why do you call it the trifecta?
Well, I've had the opportunity to be in all three of these areas. So whether it's HR, communications, learning and development, I know that there is power when you bring these groups together, and you've got to get together and be lock in step. So you're making sure that you're keeping your eye on culture, you're investing in your people through capability building, and you're finding really unique ways to communicate and to get to people. This trifecta can be incredibly powerful. And I just think it's so important to call out and make sure that, you know, along the way, the change team, everyone is working together.
Bringing it together in one place, not scattered across so many different places to go and sending employees in all directions either.
Right, exactly.
And what was the employee feedback then? What did they say about their experience?
So, I mean, a ton of great feedback. And, you know, what really meant so much to me was people were so appreciative at a time when there's so much changing around them, and you got to really put yourself in their shoes to think about how they're feeling when there's so much unknown. It felt so good, I've got to tell you, to be able to offer up and be able to help people through a change like this. Like, it was just incredibly rewarding. And you can see a lot of the feedback on the screen, but it just was incredibly rewarding to be able to help people. So.
And did people use it at all, or not really?
Okay, so let me just say again, this was totally optional. This is an optional platform for folks to use, and we had a 74% adoption rate. And so that to me was phenomenal. And not only that, we had people in the Tiger Hall app on average per person per week, 42 minutes. So people were listening to the content, they were interacting, they were learning, they were upskilling, whatever they needed for their individual development plan, they were taking advantage of it. So we were completely pleased with this. We went into this with, we are not going to force anything. We hope that you'll have a growth mindset. We're investing in you. Here's an amazing platform, Tiger Hall, that you can leverage, but it's for you, it's for the taking. And that's how we did it.
It was interesting to see how all the top content, most popular, was actually around change. Like, how do you embrace change, leading with change? Like, they consumed a lot of change-related content as well.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. Every time we released a trail or did a live stream, those top 5 content, those pieces changed. So it was continually changing. So people were digesting all different content at different points in time. And so we really appreciated that. And of course, if you're following people in the app, you can also see what they're consuming and some of the things that are really, really good and that you don't want to miss out on.
Tamissa, can I interject a question from the participants?
Absolutely.
This is a good time to do that. Thanks. I'm gonna. There's a couple of questions I'm going to kind of group together with a broad theme, which is tell us. So we understand that there's this change activation platform. Tiger Hall provides it separate, and as you said, with your use of it, it was entirely optional. Can you tell us a little about how did you make your employees aware? Like, but even before they have to know to go there. So how did you make them aware that this thing exists, how to get there, why they should bother? How'd you do that?
Yeah. So what we did is we are a traditional Microsoft Teams. We put an Outlook meeting on. First, we started with our top leaders. So say 200 invites went out and we got them to join the call. And then we said, you've all got your mobile phones by you. You're going to download the Tiger Hall app. And we had all the single sign-on and things like that already set up for everyone through their email address. And we said, we told them about the platform and what we were doing. And then we said, we're going to hang up now on this call and we're going to meet you over in the Tiger Hall app. And then we did the rest of the meeting through a live stream. So everyone could experience it and it got them in the app immediately. And then we showed the leaders where to go to their trail. And they had probably about a 90-minute trail in total between some power reads and different podcasts that we wanted them to listen to help drive transformation for the organization. And then we did it with all the people managers, did the same thing. And then we did it with all of the commercial organization. So again, you start out with that, whatever Outlook that you have, and then immediately say, now you need to go over to the app. And we had 0 issues with, oh, help, I can't get on. We had everybody on standby thinking that we were going to have possibly some issues with all of this. 0. So it was awesome.
Yeah, and that's helpful. But since that platform is optional, how do you communicate the things that are must know, like the date that, this reorg is going to be final, how it affects someone personally? Like, how do you make sure any information that's absolutely critical gets out?
Yeah, so that we did outside of the Tiger Hall app. Okay, so we still had some of our traditional ways that we would communicate with employees. This was an added bonus, knowing not everyone was in the app, so 100% of the people weren't, but that 74% were. So this was more about connectivity, upskilling the organization, and communicating with, I would just say, being very authentic, but also having our traditional ways that we communicated too. We didn't completely walk away from that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Nellie, a question for you from participants. And you had mentioned some data earlier. And the question is just whether that is publicly available, whether participants might be able to see that in detail. I think they were referring to the data around, the responses from people.
So all the Tiger Hall data, all of the graphs with like sentiment and change adoption, that's our own internal data. So that's not publicly available. But the other data points that I've shared are. So beyond those graphs of our own data, the rest I can share.
Thank you. Great.
Right.
So, Tamissa, have
Thank
we
you so much.
covered all of your content?
Yes.
Yeah, we were just going
Wonderful.
to move to Q&A there, so great timing.
Good. We have just a few minutes left. So first, I just want to thank Nellie and Tamissa so much for joining us, and honestly for modeling the kind of communication that they are telling us is so effective. I think you saw that, in them. And Tamissa, I have to ask you, because you have that beautiful orange on, and I see the branding of your slide. Was that intentional?
Totally intentional.
All right, I love it.
No,
Beautiful.
I just literally drove back from Chicago, and this is what I put on this morning. But I knew I was doing this, so the orange goes for both Kellanova and Tiger Hall.
Nice touch. Very nice touch. Good. Well, we're closing. So again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all of us for joining today. And I just want to take a moment to draw your attention to this final slide that shows you some upcoming webcast programming that might be interesting to you. I think it's September 10th. What's that? We're almost at the end of August. So about a week and a half, two weeks from now, we have another webcast around transformation and why they fail and how to address that. So all of you who work in that space, I think you'll be interested in that as well. So thanks for joining us today. And Nellie and Tamissa, my pleasure to work with you today.
Thank you, Barbara. Great to be here and work with you too.